this is a great episode to be covering. A fighter that we've actually sat and watched their career and lived through their career. And of course, this particular fighter is still alive. This is all about the golden boy, Oscar De La Hoya. We're really excited to cover his career profile, and I'm really excited to be going through some of the major fights that he was in. Obviously, the stuff outside of the ring, the notable things outside of the ring, the things that he was infamous for outside of the ring, of course. But this is a fantastic one to be doing, and a more recent fighter. A lot of the fighters we've done recently, obviously, have been older fighters from different eras of time. Now, this is a brilliant one because this is more recent and fresh in my memory of to how his career went down.
Yeah, great fight. I mean, as you say, we've been fortunate enough to be able to watch Oscar pretty much most of his career, and it was a great fight to watch. He had fast hands, he had a great left hook, really. And although he wasn't necessarily a southpaw, which we'll go into, it was just really good fun to watch at times. But whether he stepped up to the plate when he fought those big fights, well, we're going to discuss that. So I suppose it's going to be an interesting one. Is he the greatest Hispanic fighter? Possibly. There's so much to go into with Oscar De La Hoya, and some after boxing as well. There's quite a bit on that. So we decided to go with Oscar because he's a fantastic fighter and one of those recent greats, really, if you like.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. Now, of course, we're going to start way back in the beginning when he was born. And he was the second born to parents Joe Senior De La Hoya and mother Cecilia Gonzalez on February the 4th, 1973. Now, they lived in a small house on South McDonald Avenue in the southern part of their Latin American neighbourhood, surrounded by other family members. Now, he had an older brother, Joel Jr., and a younger sister, Cecilia, was born almost a decade later. The De La Hoyas had a fighting background, with Oscar's granddad, Vicente De La Hoya, fighting in the featherweight class in his hometown of Durango before locating to the northwest region of Mexico. Now, in 1956, Vicente De La Hoya emigrated to the United States, taking most of his 16 children with him, and he settled in Southern California along with many Mexican settlers. He was joined in 1957 by his son, Joel, who also boxed as a lightweight in Durango with the hope of progressing his career in America. Unfortunately, he had to abandon his dream and get a job to support his family. In 1969, Joel Sr. met 17-year-old seamstress Cecilia Gonzalez, known locally for her lovely singing voice, and she would actually sing in the evenings for extra money. And some interviews that Oscar himself referred to, he actually said about his mother, she was a professional singer.
Great heritage there, and going straight onto the book here. So in the book, The Great Hispanic Heritage by authors Susan Muradi Daraj and Rob Maddy, they wrote about the environment that Oscar lived in at the time. And this is what they said. They said the family lived in East Los Angeles, California. It was a rough neighborhood and life there was difficult. The area was plagued with crime and drugs. And for many young men, their only route of getting out was, as they say, making it big, and that was to succeed in the boxing ring. And few amateur boxers, however, basically showed the promise that Oscar demonstrated, and everyone in the family, including aunts, uncles and cousins, knew that Oscar's fists could one day lift them all out of the ghetto. Now, obviously, we've jumped a little bit ahead there. He doesn't quite get into boxing straight away, but we'll jump onto that in a sec. But just a good background story there of what he had to deal with crime and drugs, which many of these fighters had with all these career profiles.
Now, despite living on the breadline, they did have support locally. Oscar's granddad Vicente owned a restaurant called Virginia's Place, and plenty of other relatives living nearby would always offer support, making life a little easier for the family. Although Oscar claimed, "We never felt poor, we always felt like we had everything." Although there were times when he felt embarrassed about his family's lack of finances. They had to rely on food stamps, just like many others in his neighbourhood, and Oscar would often make up excuses to try and get out going shopping for his mum. Once again, we refer to that book, The Great Hispanic Heritage, and the authors wrote about one particular visit to the store that Oscar took, and it said he waited for almost an hour in the store until all the customers had paid and left before taking his purchases to the counter. When the clerk asked him why he had taken so long to make his purchase, he admitted that he did not want anyone else to see him paying with food stamps.
Bless him. He was basically destined for boxing, but Joel Senior, he was desperate for one of his sons to follow in his footsteps at becoming a professional boxer after his dreams had basically been dashed years before. Now, that seemed as if Joel Jr. was going to be the most likely to take up the mantle because basically he was the more tougher and the more assertive, while Oscar was a very sensitive and more emotional, basically a bit of a mummy's boy. And his brother Joel Jr. actually said any little bruise or any little element, he would go straight running to his mummy and basically he'd be crying. He was quite a tearful guy. So Oscar would have picked up many cuts and bruises when he was basically little nipper. He spent a lot of time out on his skateboard while his brother would play many sports, but mainly boxing due to the pressure that was coming from their dad. Doing what older brothers do, Joel Jr. basically set up a boxing match between Oscar and one of their younger cousins. And Oscar recalled, and he said, he put a pair of gloves on me and the other pair on my cousins. Then he yelled, time. Immediately, I covered my cheeks with the gloves. The next thing I knew, wham, the first punch is a left jab that goes right between my gloves and lands smack on my nose. Joel Jr., of course, said that Oscar ran home crying to his mum.
I'm not surprised after taking one right in the right in the schnoz that was as well, weren't it, by the sounds of it? Right straight down the pipe as well. So he's being forced into it, really. He was destined for it, we've said this, but essentially he was being forced into it. His brother was the promising one, and he was kind of being thrown in there to, I suppose, to make a bit of a hard nut of him, to toughen him up, as they rightly said. Now, Joel Jr. then made the bold decision to go against his dad's wishes, and he actually decided to concentrate on his preferred sport of baseball. Now, this caused a rift between Jr. and Sr. for a while, until Joel Sr. turned his attentions to his younger son. Now, Oscar was 6 years old when his father threw him into a boxing ring, but despite his small frame, he surprised many, and he took to it like a duck to water. The gym that Oscar began boxing at was the Eastside Boxing Club, managed by Joel Minares, who was one of those surprised admirers of young Oscar. The first thing Joe noticed was Oscar's southpaw stance. So during training one day, he got Oscar to try something new, later recalling, I turned him around and he caught on like that. With his stronger left hand, now his jabbing hand, Oscar was able to hurt his sparring partners with a jab before letting his hands go with breathtaking accuracy. Now, this young, shy and emotional kid was a natural. His skateboarding days were officially behind him as soon as his father realised he had real ability. And Oscar said, skateboarding was my pastime, but my father didn't want me to skateboard because he didn't want me to get hurt. I was going to become this fighter. Oscar's mum didn't want him to fight, but she surrendered to her husband's wishes. And Oscar recalls, she never wanted me to become a fighter, but my father would push it every single day, saying, you have to become this fighter. So rather than take a back seat and just allow Joel Sr. to push Oscar, she became more proactive. Cecilia would awake Oscar every morning for his daily run, serve him nutritional meals, and provide that emotional support that his father lacked. Oscar appreciated that, but he'd wished for his father's acceptance, saying, he never said to me, son, you're doing great, or you fought a great fight. He never said that to me.
Well, it's quite sad, really, when you think about it. I think Joel Senior was definitely the pushy one, and Joel Junior turning around and standing up and saying, "I ain't doing it." I mean, you could see his dad. Obviously, you could barter with him. You could have a disagreement with him. Eventually, you could get your own way if you really wanted to. So, thankfully, Cecilia was there to help Oscar. And Oscar fought his first fight when he was 7 years old, winning the fight easily in the third round against a more experienced fighter. And from that point on, Oscar realised that he actually enjoyed it, which made his father really happy, and it also got him some pocket money. So after every fight he did win, his father, his aunts and his uncles would actually reward him with 50 cents or $1. The more Oscar developed as a fighter, the harder it was for Joe Minares to find him opponents. He remembered that nobody wanted to fight him, and basically that's a common theme with many fighters that we've covered on Career Profiles. But for the next 2 years, Oscar stuck by his father's rigorous training regime without complaint and continued to amass victory after victory. In the process, he began to make a name for himself within the Latin American community as a potential to go all the way to the very top. When he was 8 years old, he won the Free Will Games, making him the youngest contender ever to do so. By the time Oscar was a teenager, he had fought over 100 bouts, winning all but 2. Then at the age of 15, he fought in the Golden Gloves tournament against another experienced and exceptional talent in Manuel Nava. Oscar showed how far he had developed when he knocked Nava down 3 times en route to a comprehensive victory. He also knocked out and defeated another amateur fighter who was 9 years older. So you're clearly seeing that Oscar De La Hoya is clearly an absolute talent at a very young age.
At a very young age, he had an exceptional amateur career as well, and obviously as we go through the process of the story, we'll hear more about how that develops. Now, we're just going to move to a different part of his life, about the fact that when boxing became his life, he didn't have a life away from boxing. Now, although he had that talent, he actually also missed out on being a normal teenager, which caused a lot of friction between him and his father. They would argue many times about social invitations. He even missed his own prom night because he was participating in a tournament in North Carolina. Now, his mother Cecilia would often be the mediator and comfort Oscar emotionally in those down days. Joel Sr. wasn't the only person who put Oscar under pressure. His whole family had aspirations that he would succeed because it would be their ticket out of poverty. Oscar certainly felt the pressure by saying, when I was winning tournaments growing up 14 or 15, everybody would put all the attention to me, uncles, aunts and our parents. Oscar never felt threatened by his father. He respected him, but he would become angry and frustrated with him, which actually helped with his development. De La Hoya later recalled, "Man, it's like inside the ring is where I used to unleash all my frustrations. If I was mad at my father that day or anything, I used to go crazy. I used to go crazy inside the ring." When all the in-house fighting was put to one side, Joe Sr. and Oscar both agreed that the Olympics was the ultimate target. Oscar attended Garfield High School but was often out of class on the road and travelling to different tournaments. His principal at Maria Elena Tostado fondly remembered him, saying, "He was just so single-minded preparing for his fights. He knew what he wanted, and he wanted it from day one. I would never have picked him out as a fighter. When I first met him, somebody told me he was going to the Olympics, and I thought it was a joke. He was the most quiet, unassuming young man you'd ever want to meet. Super nice, super humble."
Well, it's crazy. This quiet boy. No one expected it, but he just had that natural ability that we clearly keep saying. And he's, as you said, he took to it like a duck to water. Now, obviously, the Olympics was the dream, but there was something that happened to him. So it wasn't easy for young Oscar, but boy, did he succeed. His amateur record was outstanding, earning him numerous titles. In 1988, at the age of 15, he won the US Junior Olympic 119 pound or 54 kilogram title. The next year, he won the national gloves. In 1990, the 125 pounds or the 57 kilos, he won the US amateur title before capturing the gold medal at the Goodwill Games in Seattle. Now, it was at these games that Cecilia skipped a week of radiotherapy treatment just so she could attend Oscar's fights. Cecilia was actually diagnosed with breast cancer, and she actually kept it a secret to protect her children. However, it got to the point where she could no longer hide the truth and knew it was basically time to come clean. And she told her sons, not Cecilia, who was aka Cece at the time, the youngest of the daughters, as she already knew and understood the seriousness of her condition at the time. Funny enough, she was the much younger one, but she understood. And Cecilia, the mum, told her sons, "Don't worry about me. I'll be okay. Don't worry."
Now, Tim Kawanakami, the author of Oscar De La Hoya's biography Golden Boy, The Fame, Money and Mystery of Oscar De La Hoya, wrote of their mother's illness. The De La Hoya boys were in denial. They both could not accept the truth, but when her hair began to fall out, it was obvious that she was struggling. Joel Sr. would work long hours to pay for Cecilia's treatment, but he would also tell managers that Oscar would sign with them once he turned professional. In return, he received money, which he used to pay his wife's mounting hospital bills. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to save his wife, who was dying, and Oscar recalled one of the last conversations he ever had with her. "She told me she was very confident after watching me win the Goodwill Games. She told me, 'I want you to win the gold medal.'" On October the 29th, 1990, Cecilia died at only the age of 39.
Wow, that was I must have been 16. So I get home from school one day, in East LA, 1-bedroom home. I used to live in a garage, actually. And so I get into the home and I see my mom crying, hysterically, just crying. And I've never seen her shed a tear ever. Okay. So now I'm scared and I'm like asking her, "What's wrong, Mom? What's wrong?" And she shows me her back, and it's all nothing but scars, burnt scar, like just burnt. And she's crying and she tells me, "Son, I have cancer. I'm dying of cancer." And it happened so fast because she didn't want to tell the family. She didn't want to tell her kids. She didn't want to go to the hospital because she would always be saying, "Who's going to be taking care of my family?" or "Who's going to clean the house?" And so from the time she told me, I literally, a couple months passed. I didn't know how to cope with it. I just, at that age, I mean, wow, my mom passed. So I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to do. I kind of retired from doing anything. I stopped going to school. I stopped training because at the time, now at that age, at 16, I was training for the Olympics. I was getting ready for the Olympics. So I just quit everything. I remember I started drinking. I started drinking a lot. Because for me, that was a way to get away, to escape, kind of to drown myself, drown my sorrows and dig myself into a hole, I didn't know what to do.
Wow, horrible. I mean, it must have been so traumatic. And with, Oscar, he loved his mum. He was a mama's boy. And to lose your mum at such a young age is devastating for any child. I mean, it must have been really hard. And Oscar was devastated with the loss of his mother. And he even contemplated quitting boxing altogether. But then he remembered that last conversation with his mum and he decided to win that gold for her. All he could dream about from then on was that 1992 Olympic Games in Barcelona. And he was super confident of his chances when writing on an Olympic poster, 92 champ. This was, as Golden Boy author Kawakami described, a cocky promise from a child to himself. Oscar said himself, "I knew I was going to do something even then. That was my goal and that was my dream." So he went to the Olympics. He fought hard. He made sure to make sure he's going to make that a US Olympic team. And every time he actually won in the preparations for the games, he would always fall to his knees and he'd blow a kiss upward to the sky to his mother in heaven. And he said it was just a way of saying for you. And when he was very nervous. He said he was so, because he had all this promise. A lot of people expected him to go on and win the gold. And he was the gold medal favourite. And when he finally landed in Barcelona, he said, this is a quote from, I think he said to one of the presses around the Olympic press. And he said, "There's a lot of pressure when you're favoured to win gold. Some guys are coming into this with nothing to lose. They're just here for respect. But the pressure is on me. I'm expected to win. This pushes me harder in training. I'm only 19 though, and it's tough sometimes. I've been thinking about winning a gold medal for 6 years. I'll put everything on hold for this."
Now, Oscar De La Hoya fought in the 132-pound or 60-kilo weight division, and his first fight was against the Brazilian Adilson Silva, defeating him with ease by knockout in the third round. Oscar then met Nigerian Moses Adoyin in the last 16, beating him on points 16-4. All seemed to be going brilliantly until Oscar faced the Bulgarian Tonchev in the quarterfinals. He was coasting after 2 rounds, but the Olympic judging was once again brought into dispute. Oscar was clearly dominating, but somehow the judges had only the score 7-6 in his favour. Oscar was so annoyed that he came out like a man possessed and battered Tonchev to the point that no judge could take that victory away from him, winning the third round 9-1 and the whole fight 16-7 on points. Oscar was now guaranteed at least a bronze medal, but only the gold was on his mind. In the semi-final, he faced the Korean Hong Sung-sik, who was as awkward as they come, someone who could make you look bad. And Oscar said after the fight, "It was a terrible experience, a nightmare. I'd watched him earlier. I know how to box a guy who's in there to box, but I don't know how to box a wrestler." Now, Oscar managed to wrestle himself through to the gold medal match, winning 11-10 score. The final was against Marco Rudolph of Germany, a guy Oscar had actually lost to in the amateurs previously. Once again, the judging was suspect after the first round. Oscar was determined not to become another robbed American fighter like Roy Jones Jr. 4 years before him, So he took the fight to Rudolph, knocking him down en route to a 7-2 points win and the Olympic gold medal. An emotional Oscar dropped to his knees, made a cross, and pointed to the sky as he had done every time he won a fight after his mum's death. He also paraded the American and Mexican flags around the ring to show the world his dual heritage. He was quoted as saying, "I'm very relieved now. All this pressure is finally off my back. I was putting pressure on myself. I have to win gold. I have to do it. It's like a load off my back. Finally, it's over, and I'm happy." And at this point, Oscar makes that decision to end his amateur career with a record of 223 wins, 163 by knockout, and only 5 defeats.
Wow, what an impressive record, and how great that must have been. Going there as a favourite, people just assume that these guys are just banned for the gold, but with the corruption in Olympics and some of the scoring, as you rightly mentioned with the Roy Jones Jr. situation, you know, it's a lot of pressure on those young guys at such a young age as well, and that's a fantastic achievement for him to be picking up the gold medal. And obviously he's turning pro, so following the Olympics and the success of the Olympics, the 19-year-old Oscar De La Hoya had become a television star for NBC, who covered the Olympic Games at the time. And his background story of a poor kid who lost his mum to cancer and then went on to win the gold medal was quite a sell for the American audience. Plus the added factor that he was an handsome fella, and he also it just helped them promote Oscar as a star. And he was going professional. And now, after moving his family into a nicer area, he moved away from that poor side of things, which he always said to his mum, when he gets the money, he's going to move them all out. Obviously, she wasn't around to see it. He now had to decide which manager or management team he was going to work with. Now, Oscar knew the boxing business well, and he understood it enough. And he knew that there were sharks around and they were circling. And he spoke about this tough decision. And he said, "A medal could set me up for life. It's kind of scary because my life will change. There's a lot of crooks. People will just want to use you. Pro boxing is very dangerous, not only up in the ring, but on the outside too." Now, in the end, De La Hoya did select a duo of Robert Mittelman and Steve Nelson, a partnership that promised him the most money out of all those managers. He also signed with a promoter who was Bob Arum.
Now, initially, Mittelman and Nelson contemplated throwing Oscar into a world title fight against Genaro Hernandez, the WBA super featherweight champion at 130 pounds. In the end, they opted against that idea and decided to ease Oscar in rather than chucking their new protege into the deep end. During the weeks leading up to his first fight against Lamar Williams, 5-1-1 at the Great Western Forum in Inglewood, California, a Forum public relations director, John Beruti, nicknamed De La Hoya the Golden Boy. Of course, a name that would stick with him for the remainder of his career and therefore after. So now we're going to move into his pro debut and, of course, his early fights. Now, he was rightfully confident of success on his debut and spoke to the press before the fight and said, "In professional boxing, you go much slower. You can take your time in 6 rounds, pick your shots. I like working into the body, taking my time. My favourite is a hook to the body and working back up. It comes naturally. I like confusing the fighter and using fast combinations." Now, on November the 23rd, 1992, in front of a pro De La Hoya crowd of 6,185, he never needed more than 1 minute and 42 seconds. The Associated Press writer Ken Peters wrote, "He landed a barrage of blows to Williams' midsection and head, and Williams crumpled in a corner. When Williams regained his feet, De La Hoya moved in and landed more hard combinations. Williams made it up once more but had nothing left. His promoter, Mr. Bob Arum, said after the fight, Oscar De La Hoya is going to be the biggest star in the history of boxing below the heavyweight division, even bigger than Sugar Ray Leonard." 3 weeks later, Oscar was back in the ring against Cliff Hicks, 13-6, in Phoenix at the America West Arena on December the 12th. The bout was televised on pay-per-view on the Michael Carabal and Robinson Cuesta undercard for the light flyweight title. De La Hoya knocked Hicks down 40 seconds into the fight and finished him off with a straight right hand just 75 seconds into the round. What a start for Oscar De La Hoya's career, the Golden Boy. And of course, what made you laugh so much at that point when I was talking was Mr. Bob Arum and his brilliant quotes of how everybody is going to be the next superstar.
Even bigger than Sugar Ray Leonard. He did make me laugh. I tell you what, he ain't far off, to be fair. He did in terms of money-wise, he earned a hell of a lot, which you'll go into. So I'm not knocking him too much there. But Oscar enjoyed his first full year as a pro in 1993, winning his next 8 fights, 7 by knockout, with 1 going the 8-round distance. His last fight to end the year was another victory over Mauricio Valenzuela, who was 34-30-2. But it was significant because it was the first time that it had been knocked down. Now, in Golden Boy biographer Tim Karakami, who actually wrote, this is what he wrote about the fight, De La Hoya hadn't even been on the canvas, not in over 200 amateur fights, not in the Olympics, not in his pro fights. He was stunned, but he wasn't hurt. He hopped right up from a seated position, winked quickly at Perletta, who was his girlfriend at the time, sitting ringside, then glared intently over at Valenzuela, who seemed more surprised than De La Hoya by the development. Now, when the fight resumed, De La Hoya immediately dropped Valenzuela with a right hand, ending the fight with a left hook in round 1. So he gets put down, jumps back up, and literally puts this guy down in the same round. De La Hoya later said, "That was the first time in my career that my glove touched the canvas. It was a new experience. I guess it's sort of history. My first knockdown, but it's never going to happen again. I guarantee it."
Now we're going to move into the section of his career where he starts to have the management problems. There's always going to be issues between managers and fighters, and of course we've covered this throughout the whole series of career profiles, and it's a story that we seem to tell every single week about the issues with managers and fighters. Now, Oscar was due out again in December against Jose Vidal Concepcion, but Joel Sr. was still concerned about the knockdown by Valenzuela, that he persuaded manager Robert Mittelman to bring in another trainer to assist Robert Alcazar, and Mittelman chose Carlos Ortiz, a former lightweight champion. It was a bad decision, and one he regrets admitting. "I picked the worst guy in the world, an abrasive personality. There were a million other guys I could have picked. I should have just told the father, hey, not now, we don't need anything now. That would have been it. Alcazar's doing fine. It was a lucky punch by Valenzuela. Oscar got up and finished him right off." Now, while training, Oscar was advised by Ortiz to be more aggressive, but he ended up getting hit hard, which infuriated Oscar so much he stormed out of the ring. So after Oscar stormed out of that ring, Alcazar, even though he's pissed off at being brushed aside, he still goes and comforts De La Hoya. That night, Oscar insisted that Ortiz be fired, and the next day, he fired co-managers Mittelman and Nelson, but Bob Arum remained his promoter, and Oscar was quoted as saying, "They're all crooks and thieves. Bob Arum is just the straightest, nicest crook."
Great one. Excellent.
The Concepcion fight was eventually cancelled, and HBO wanted De La Hoya to sign a long-term contract to televise his fights. To get that contract completed, HBO agreed to broadcast the fight with the undefeated WBO super featherweight champion Jimmy Rudal, who was 16-0 of Denmark, even though the network didn't recognise the WBO title as a legitimate organisation. Oscar had to face the press before the fight and explain his reasons for sacking his co-managers, and he said, "First of all, they did not do what they promised in the contract. Breach of contract. They breached the contract so many times, we found out they had no money to support what they had to do. It was very scary and a very tough decision, but I put my foot down, and that was it." Oscar then went on to say his former managers tried to manipulate his father to get closer to Oscar before finishing off with, "My father will be behind me. Team De La Hoya will be back together. Robert, my brother, Arturo, that's the Team De La Hoya right there. The whole world will know what's going on. They will know I'm a good guy, and we have so many things planned. I mean, this is not all about money. This is all about taking care of my family."
Well, interesting, isn't it, really? I mean, you can understand what he was saying. I mean, Bob Arum did back that statement up and said that apparently some of the money that they were putting forward weren't quite there. And these guys weren't really boxing men. They were more just businessmen. They fell by the wayside. And Mittelman actually did have a telephone conversation with Associated Press, Ken Peters. And he said they violated the contract before we did. He took a payment from us 3 weeks ago. He said he wasn't getting enough money, but he's already received over $800,000 paid to him in less than 1 year out of $1 million supposed to be paid over 2 years. We made the kid a superstar. Now he wants to go out and kick us in the teeth. I sort of disagree with that because he was already a superstar no matter who he was with. The fact that they give him quite a bit of money and he seemed to knock him on the head and kick him in the teeth is probably definitely right. But Team De La Hoya they hired a guy called Mike Hernandez for financial guidance, and he actually owned a car dealership, and he had given Oscar De La Hoya a Corvette for winning that Olympic gold in Barcelona. And Hernandez provided sound financial advice and brought stability to De La Hoya's life, and eventually signed that lucrative contract with HBO that would give him $7.5 million for 5 fights with an option for 5 more that could push the total package up to $20 million. This guy was already a megastar after the Olympics, like Jones Jr., but it was just different. They offered him so much more money.
And this is before he's even become a world champion as well. And
Crazy.
That leads us nicely into going for a world title at £130. So that title fight, his first title fight, took place at the renovated Olympic Auditorium in downtown Los Angeles, making De La Hoya the third generation of his family to fight in the building, following his father and grandfather on March the 5th, 1994. De La Hoya knocked down Bridal in the first and second rounds until the doctor stopped the fight in the 10th. Bridal credited Oscar and said, "I thought I was good. He's good." He then joked, "My strategy was to kill his stomach, but he killed my face first."
What was the difficulty of following up on your knockdowns? Was he just too tough and quick?
Well, a softball is really difficult when you go in there and try to throw your punches. You're so used to fighting a right-handed boxer that when you fight a left-handed boxer, it's like it's a whole different game. It's a whole different plan that you have to sort out up in the ring, and that's what happened. But I caught him up in later rounds.
Now this is the end of the fight. Did you punch enough to the body in this fight, Oscar?
I really couldn't punch to the body a lot because of his left-hand style. But later on, I started to throw the right hooks to the body, and they kind of worked. But I knew that I had to throw different punches, come up in different angles to win the fight.
What kind of feelings and impressions do you have about following your father and grandfather into this arena and fighting here?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to thank the Needleman family and Mr. Bob Arum, the best promoter in the world, to having given me this opportunity of reopening the Grand Olympic Auditorium. And it was just a great honor for myself because my father fought here, my grandfather fought here, and now for me to fight here is just the best thing that could ever happen to Los Angeles and myself.
Now, on May the 27th, at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, Oscar made his first defense of the WBO super featherweight title against the Italian Giorgio Campanella, who was 20-0. Just 15 seconds into the fight, and Oscar got caught with a straight left to the jaw, which sent him down to the canvas. He managed to see himself through the round and recover, and he knocked Campanella down in the second round before finally knocking him out in the third. Afterwards, De La Hoya said about the fight, "I started out trying to be that big macho fighter, bang with the great banger. By the second round, I realised that I could easily outbox him and get him from the outside using my reach advantage and stay away from that left hook." So he got the great win against Bridal. He becomes the world champion for the WBO, who at this time are not really recognised as much as they are today. But he then goes on to defend it in a thrilling 3-round contest against Campanella. What a start to him being a world champion.
Yeah, and these fights are all on YouTube. The Bridal fight's on there, and they're all on there, and they're basically just literally tearing WBO to bits. I mean, today you think about the WBO, and it's one of the 4 organisations. It's a top belt, but back then, no, they were openly saying I don't rate it. It's just another win. It's an easy guy. Bridal was an easy win. That's how they felt. So this is his first title, and it's almost like being discredited before he'd even won it. And in the Campanella fight, that's on there, and he's in trouble from that left hook. I tell you what, he really gets hurt. And he again, it's a great learning curve for Oscar, and it helps him. So, it's the next step. It's the next world title, and it's another division. And the 130-pound division was becoming a burden. Oscar was finding it more difficult to boil down to that weight, so he decided to move up to the lightweight division. The eccentric Jorge Pez, who's 53, 6-4. Now, this dude coming with the greatest haircut you'll ever see, had some writing. I think they call him the clown. He was an absolute clown. The guy is, Jorge is just unbelievable. You go and watch this guy. He was a former world champion as well, but oh my goodness, he's an absolute madman. But he was the next challenge for the vacant WBO lightweight title, and it was a chance to be a 2-weight world champion at the age of only 21 years old. Although, as we keep saying, the WBO not considered to be a credible title during that time. Now, on July 29, back at the MGM Grand, Oscar went into the ring, not as the crowd favourite. Jorge was the guy they rooted for, and you can hear him going, Jorge, Jorge, during the fight. Basically because many Latinos favoured the rough, tough brawlers rather than that privileged kid who they felt basically Oscar had turned his back on his ethnic roots. Although he was come from a poor background, as soon as he had the chance to get out, he did, and they felt that he just turned his back on him. Now, Richard Steele, funny enough, actually officiated this bout, and he too was obviously getting booed by sections of the crowd following his decision to end the Meldrick Taylor Cesar Chavez fight in a very controversial circumstances. I'm sure there's a fight we will discuss at some point. Now, that didn't make a difference to Oscar De La Hoya. He knocked Paz with a combo, which ended with that lovely left hook. It was like a left hook uppercut, and he was basically counted out in the second round, and he remained on the canvas for another minute after. Now, this was a show of strength for De La Hoya's new weight, as Paz had only been knocked down 3 times and never been knocked out once in his whole previous 63 fights. And he actually said, I don't remember anything after getting knocked down. I don't remember the second round at all. I've never been hit that hard by a punch before. So clearly Oscar's showing not only is he a good boxer, but he's got some dynamite in that left hook.
The way he dispatched Paez was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. The way he became 2-weight world champion at just 21 years old, he was a superstar. We've said it before. He was a superstar at this particular time. Now he's becoming even bigger. Now all the attention's turned towards the newly crowned IBF lightweight champion and fellow Mexican Rafael Ruiz, who was 43-1. But it would be another 10 months before they would face, with promoter Bob Arum targeting their collision course for the Cinco de Mayo celebration in May of '95. In the meantime, Oscar remained active, recording 2 knockout victories over Carl Griffith and John Avila in rounds 3 and 9 respectively. To begin 1995, De La Hoya made his third defence of the WBO lightweight title against the tough Puerto Rican Juan John Molina, who was 36-3 at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas. Molina was the former IBF featherweight champ who had moved up in weight class and was trained by the famous Lou Duva. De La Hoya and Alcazar were desperate to beat a Duva-trained fighter. The fight went the 12-round distance, with Oscar bearing the marks and bruises of a hard-fought battle. In the end, he won a unanimous decision and was quoted after as saying, "I had to become a warrior. John's more experience, but I should have boxed more. I fought a very unintelligent fight, but with only 17 fights, nobody in the right mind would have gone up against a great fighter like John Molina. So you have to give me a lot of credit because I went up in there against a real great champion."
So by the time Cinco de Mayo celebration weekend arrived, Oscar De La Hoya had a professional record of 17 wins and 15 knockouts and was now 22 years old. Oscar and his team felt an additional trainer was needed to assist Alcazar once again, and they settled for Mexican trainer Jesus Rivero. And the biographer again, Kawakami, noted that as the camp wore on, De La Hoya was visibly changing his style, fighting more fluidly, moving back and forth with his hips, easily avoiding hard shots and flicking inside and out for counterattacks. And it was fairly evident that he had altered his training situation. The sparring partners started telling outsiders that there was a strange little man doing most of the training while Alcazar fumed. Now, on the night of May 5th, Alcazar was the lead trainer in the corner while Rivero actually watched the fight at ringside. Now, the fight between De La Hoya and Ruiz grossed more than $10 million in pay-per-view sales and was a marquee fight for De La Hoya, who actually stopped Ruiz in 2 rounds after putting him down twice. Oscar was now considered to be a legitimate world champion after capturing the IBF title at 135 pounds.
On September the 9th, 1995 at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, Oscar took on his undefeated rival, Genaro Hernandez, who was now 32-0-1, and he made his feelings clear about his opponent, saying, "I hate his guts. I've never hated an opponent more." Hernandez retaliated when he said, "I think the money got to him. I got a little more pressure in this one because a lot of people want to see Oscar go down, and they think I'm the person to do it." Now, Hernandez did enter the ring with a fractured nose suffered in a sparring session against Sugar Shane Mosley, but he actually kept it a secret. As a result of his injury, Hernandez eventually retired in his corner at the end of the 6th. Their bitter rivalry was put to one side after the bout, and both actually gained a huge respect for one another.
Yeah, an interesting one that he had. Again, these fighters just fighting with injuries. Clearly shouldn't have done. The rivalry was there, and it would set him in good stead for future fights. And so the next thing for him to do is he moved up again, the 140-pound division. Now, Mike Hernandez recognised the significance of fighting at MSG in New York, saying, I think if you don't go to Madison Square Garden, you'll never be big. Madison Square Garden is number one for boxing. So on December 15, 1995, Oscar made his New York City debut at the Mecca of boxing against Jesse James Leha, who was 31-2 at the time. Now, it was a perfect performance with the stoppage coming on the bell to end the second round. And to top off a great year, he was actually selected as the Ring Magazine's Fighter of the Year. Now, in an attempt to chase down Oscar's hero, Julio Cesar Chavez, 99-1 at the time, who held the WBC welterweight title, he moved up to his third different weight, that 140-pound weight, as I said earlier. Now, after demoralising Daryl Tyson, who was 47-8-1 in 2 rounds, the big fight with Chavez finally became a reality. During this time, resentment of Oscar De La Hoya continued to grow in his hometown. And while attending a parade celebrating Mexican Independence Day in East LA, De La Hoya had tomatoes tossed at him from the crowd. Afterwards, he calmly said, "They love me everywhere but LA."
I feel sorry for him. I honestly do. I feel sorry for him. Like, the guy's just tried to basically make something of his life. He has made something of his life, and yet people don't like him because they think he's turned his back on his heritage, which, I mean, we'll have that conversation at the end of the episode about what we think about that, but it just seems a bit extreme that people have gone to that, throwing tomatoes at the guy. The guy's a superstar and you're throwing tomatoes at him. What's all that about? Now, going back to the Chavez fight then, Bob Arum guaranteed almost 18 million in purses for the two fighters and set up another one of those city tours like he did with Hagler Hearns 11 years earlier that would send both men travelling 23 cities in 11 days to promote the fight, and it was billed as Ultimate Glory. It took place at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas on June 7th, 1996, and was shown only on closed-circuit television because Arum said cable companies had not clamped down on their widespread use of black boxes to steal pay-per-view signals.
I had one of them.
Who didn't have one of them at that day?
Brilliant, wasn't they?
Now, in front of a crowd of 15,283, De La Hoya opened up a cut over Chavez's left eye early in the first round. By the fourth, Chavez was a bloody mess, so the referee Joe Cortez called time and had him examined by the ringside physician Philippe Homansky, who rightly stopped the fight. It was Chavez's first knockout loss in 100 fights. After the fight, Chavez said he suffered a cut over the left eye 5 days before the fight, but his camp didn't tell anyone because he didn't want to postpone the fight. Chavez said, "I was already hurt over my eyebrow. I really didn't want to postpone the fight because of it. Oscar De La Hoya doesn't really have a big punch. I just couldn't see because of the cut." Oscar's response was, "It just shows that he's a crybaby. I'm happy because that means he can't take losing. He has to come up with excuses for losing to me." Now, the win didn't help Oscar's critics as they were able to downplay the win due to the cut. It did, however, add spice to a rematch.
Oscar, congratulations to the fight first. How did the cut eye change the fight in your judgment?
Well, in my judgment, Julio Cesar Chavez had something more to worry about in his corner. We knew if a cut, a broken nose, or if he was hurt, that would change all that during the fight. So that's what we try to accomplish early on in the rounds.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by what you just said, that you knew if something like that happened, he would have a problem?
Well, Julio Cesar Chavez, once they attack him, once he knows that he can back up a fighter, he's in trouble, he's lost. And what we try to do, that was our game plan, our mental game plan, to have him think up in his corner. Because when he's thinking, wow, this guy throws hard jabs, this guy throws left hooks, and then the cut occurs, he has something else to worry about. Instead of his boxing tactics, he has a cut to worry about.
So you weren't surprised after that cut that he didn't seem to be the relentless aggressor that he was at his best?
Well, Julio Cesar Chavez was still the aggressor. He was still putting pressure. He's a true warrior. He's a true champion. But the blood, the cuts, the broken nose was affecting him.
You say the broken nose. Do you know that you broke his nose as well?
It felt on my left hook as if I hit a good, solid left hook, and the blood just started gushing out like Janelle Hernandez's nose the way I did to his.
What do you feel now about how Mexican and Mexican-American fans will treat you having won this fight in this fashion?
Well, I hope they're on my side. Hopefully there's some that are on my side, because I want to try to be like Julio Cesar Chavez. I want to try to be like the great champion that he is, and he will still be the great champion of the future, because he's a great person inside the ring and outside the ring.
Yeah, rematch that will happen at some point down the line. And soon after the Chavez fight, De La Hoya broke up with his long-term girlfriend, and Veronica Paletta, who he looked at and gave a wink to when he got knocked down for the first time in his career. And he decided to take a few months off from boxing and hit the golf course, and he enjoyed himself for the first time in a long time. And a cancelled bout on November 1996 extended the break for Oscar, who was looking forward to getting back into the ring and back to his day job. And he was quoted as saying, "I have a love for the sport now, like I had when I was 6 years old again. The layoff was tough to handle. I missed fighting, but I needed the break too. Boxing is my number one priority now." And De La Hoya extended his pro career record to 23-0 with 20 knockouts after going the distance with undefeated former lightweight champion Miguel Angel Gonzalez, who was 41-0. Now, it was a Labour performance, but it was a wide points decision nevertheless. The next move for Oscar, now 24 years of age, was to move up yet another weight to that 147 division, that glamour division in the welterweight. And he went in search of his fourth world title in his fourth weight class.
Now, De La Hoya faced the former pound-for-pound king and WBC welterweight champion Pernell Whitaker, who was 41-1, at the Thomas & Mack Center in Las Vegas on April the 12th, 1997. Oscar earned $10 million and Pernell earned $6 million, with the fight generating 720,000 pay-per-view buys and $28 million in pay-per-view revenue. Now, Oscar suffered a cut under his right eye in the third round following an accidental clash of heads. As a result of the bonkers rules that were in place, Whitaker had a point deducted. Oscar then suffered a flash knockdown in the ninth, but he did switch to southpaw halfway through the fight, which did seem to help, but he could still not catch Whitaker. The final judges' scorecards were 110 to 116 twice and 111 to 115, all in favour of the winner, Oscar De La Hoya. Now, the fight was a lot closer than the final score suggested, and according to a Las Vegas Review Journal, a poll of writers who covered the fight, 14 of them scored it for Whitaker, and 11 actually scored it for De La Hoya, with one scoring it a draw. Oscar got the win, but it was just by the skin of his teeth. This is one we covered for Pernell Whitaker's career profile quite recently, where we felt Pernell Whitaker got pretty hard done to in this particular fight.
Yeah, I remember this. That was when I watched it again. That was the last time I'd watched it, when I was going through Pernell Whitaker's career. And Pernell was robbed, twice before this, badly. This wasn't necessarily a robbery, but again, it was a close fight. It could have been a draw. It was a very close fight. I'm not saying that Oscar didn't deserve to win the fight, but you can see from, the Las Vegas Review Journal as well. And if you watch it yourself, you tend to favour Whitaker. That's what I did, and I still do. I'll watch it again. I don't think I'd change my mind. So he did get away with one there, but he won himself another world title. That the WB, was it the WBC welterweight champion now? I mean, it's incredible. Great. This young boy, this young kid is showing he's got some great skills, albeit Pernell Whitaker slowly on the decline at this point. And Oscar's relationship with his trainer, the new guy that he brought in, who was Rivero, actually came to an abrupt end following that very close win over Whitaker. Now, Oscar blamed the strategy of Rivero for the reason why he struggled to adapt. And he said, "I think, like in the third round, I said, man, this game plan is not right. It was hard for me to change. I won the fight on heart and talent alone. Rivero was never told he was fired. They literally just cut all ties and moved on. What they did do next was a great move, and they hired the legendary trainer in Emmanuel Steward as his replacement, with Alcazar coming back as an assistant. Now, Stewart actually spoke of his new talent after Oscar won a knockout win over David Kamau, who was 28-1, saying, Oscar's biggest asset, I think, is the unbelievable intensity and viciousness that he brings into the ring. He's totally transformed once the bell rings, and I have never seen a fighter who does that the way he does. I just don't see him losing to anyone, and that is a great. I mean, what highly spoke of there by Emmanuel Steward, considering Hitman Hearns and all the other guys he's had, and Klitschko after Lewis. I mean, for him to say this about Oscar De La Hoya, it just shows you that this. If Emmanuel can see it, and you can see it on the tape, you can see it on YouTube. This guy at this moment, Oscar De La Hoya, was a talent.
Yeah, he was. It didn't look like he was going to be defeated by anybody as well, because he's so good. One of the best fighters, probably pound for pound at the time. Now, before De La Hoya made his first defence of the WBC title, he got engaged but then called it off after finding out another woman was going to have his baby. Naughty, naughty Oscar De La Hoya. Back in the ring, and De La Hoya's next challenge came in the form of Hector Macho Camacho, who was 63-3-1. Now, Camacho went into the fight as cocky as ever, saying, if I'd have met him when we were both 130 pounds, I'd have killed him. On the streets, I'd have kicked his butt, but he'd never go to Harlem anyway. Oscar made the trash-talking Puerto Rican eat his words. He floored him in the ninth and went on to win by unanimous decision and collect a hefty $9 million. Camacho told the Associated Press boxing writer Ed Schuler Jr., Oscar is the best I ever fought. He did everything he said he would, except knock me out.
Oh, great performance. A great quote there as well from Camacho, Hector Camacho. So Oscar got himself another successful 8th round knockout defense against a guy called Wilfredo Rivera, and that was to end 1997. And Stewart, he became the next trainer to be shown the exit door. Now, this all stems from Bob Arum, Hernandez, and Joel Sr. They were the catalysts of removing Stewart because they apparently feared that he was trying to get Don King, good old Don King, appeared in every episode, that they felt Emmanuel Stewart was trying to get Don King to take over Oscar's promotional side of things. Now, Stewart did actually say, in his words, after he was fired, they were trying to find any reason to get rid of me. Everybody became uncomfortable with me, except for Oscar. Now, Alcazar returned as the head trainer in the corner, and Aaron brought in Gil Clancy from New York to assist him. Now, only 2 American athletes made more money than Oscar De La Hoya in 1997, and they were basketball star Michael Jordan and boxing heavyweight champion Evander Holyfield. De La Hoya earned a staggering $38 million, and he became a household name and was now ranked as the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. He had many endorsements, made numerous commercials, and frequently appeared on television. And he also began dating an actress and Miss USA 1995 title holder was Shanna Molka on October 1997.
So this is the point of his career where I would say he was at his best in both the ring, outside of the ring. His life was going the best it could possibly be going in 1997. That was one of his greatest years in boxing. Now, a wrist injury and an extended break kept Oscar out of the ring for 6 months in 1998, but he returned to the ring with an easy title defence against Patrick Charpentier, who was 27-4-1, picking up a 23rd knockout win in 28 victories. Now, with the boxing world clamouring for a De La Hoya Trinidad fight, the Julio Cesar Chavez rematch was made for September the 18th at the Thomas & Mack Center in Las Vegas. It was a big money fight that would take Oscar over the $100 million mark in his career earnings, but it was also important for Oscar to gain the respect of his fellow Latinos, saying, "This fight is a very personal fight to me. I'm fighting for the respect I never got beating him the first time." 36-year-old Chavez was soundly beaten and did not come out for round 9. And after the fight, the Mexican legend said, "He beat me right. I told him this would be a great fight and he would get my respect. I give him my respect now."
Well, finally, and I don't think he got much criticism for that either. Although 36 years old, again, Chavez. The criticism was at this point coming from Pernell, who was on the way down, Chavez on the way down. So that's where they were knocking him. It's still the same thing, more or less. But we're going to jump to his personal life, the outside and at the ring antics. And De La Hoya and Monclar actually announced their engagement in October 1998 before the birth of their daughter, Atinia Cecilia, was he after his mum, De La Hoya. And on March 29, 1999, Molka actually said it wasn't a planned pregnancy, but it was understood if it happened, it would be a beautiful thing. And if it didn't, then that was fine too. So it's one of those ones where, they're sort of trying, but, if it happens, it happens. And Oscar, as you already alluded to earlier, he was quite a ladies' man. And he actually had two other sons. Jacob De La Hoya was born on February 18, 1998, and Devon De La Hoya was born on November 30, 1998. Clearly busy in 1997 with the ladies as well, and both from previous relationships. And one of the girls was a show girl, and the other one was a woman who kept her identity unknown to the public to basically protect her privacy. Now, Oscar's year did actually get worse. It got really bad, actually. And outside the ring, when he was actually accused of rape, and the Mexican authorities investigated with no charges filed, and De La Hoya maintained and still maintains his innocence. Now, a lawsuit was then filed in San Bernardino, California, County Superior Court, alleging that De La Hoya had actually raped a girl who was 15 years old at the time in a hotel room in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, in June 1996. Now, the suit was heard and it was settled out of court later on, a few years later in 2001. Now, you can find these. This is information's all out there on the internet, so this isn't news to anyone, but this is apparently what alleged happened. And obviously, that outside antics there is clearly, you're not going to be right when you go into the ring, basically. That's the point I think we're trying to make here. But yeah, not good.
No, not really. I alluded to it a bit earlier about him dipping his whip everywhere, but I didn't realise how bad it was, in the sense that he ended up having two other sons with two other different women whilst he was engaged to Miss USA. Come on, man, Joe. This is a guy who's a very good looking chap, and he was basically dipping that whip wherever he could. Now, the rape allegation is a very serious allegation, and we're never going to know the truth behind it, of course. The suspicion for me is that it was settled out of court. Why did they settle it out of court? Why would you not go to court and maintain your innocence all the way through that? Two reasons could be: he was guilty of it, and he just wanted to settle out of court, and he had that much money, he wanted to pay him off. Or the alternative was, people like Bob Arum, the promoters around him, were saying, just pay the girl off. We'll make that money back in no time. It doesn't matter whether you did it or you didn't. Just pay him off. And that wouldn't surprise me with the stories we've heard on all our podcasts that we've done about people like Bob Arum and Don King. Wouldn't surprise me with any of them. Now, Oscar may have earned the respect of Chavez, but again, the critics were still out in full force. To finally put any doubters to rest, he fought the dangerous and undefeated Ghanaian Ike Quartey, who was 34-0-1 with 29 KOs at the Thomas & Mack Center in Vegas on February the 13th, 1999. Now, before their bout, Oscar told Beth Harris, "It'll stop the criticism a bit. Chavez was an exciting fight, but this one is going to be a war. Hopefully, people will acknowledge the fact that I'm stepping up in talent with my opponents. Even Bob Arum didn't want this fight to be next for me, but I wanted this fight because challenges like this make me train harder and motivate me. I know that I'll be fighting all the fighters." It was an excellent fight. Go back and watch it. Both fighters hit the canvas in the 6th and Quartey again in the 12th, and De La Hoya just nicked a split decision with 114-115 in favour of Quartey, and 116-112, 116-113 to De La Hoya. The Associated Press scored 116-111 for unofficial scorecard by Harold Lederman had it 114-113 to Quartey. Bill Clancy said it was one of the greatest welterweight fights I've ever seen. Many observers believe this to be Oscar's most impressive victory today. My word, it was certainly a fight. It's a fight that I probably haven't even considered as a legendary night, because this is an absolute barn burner of a fight. One of De La Hoya's finest moments, one of his finest fights, even though it was a close fight.
It really was, and the fact that he did at times in there, he was that puncher fighter, and it worked in. It just created a spectacle, didn't it? It really did, and I mean, Bill Clancy saying it's one of the greatest welterweight fights he's ever seen. I mean, that is a bit strong to say that, but it is definitely it's worthy of a legendary night. 100%, it is a great fight. If anyone's not seen it, do go back. It is all literally, you can follow Oscar De La Hoya's career on YouTube. I've basically more or less done it for the last week. For the fights that I haven't seen, the big fights we've all seen, we'll all go into soon. But this is one that sort of gets buried in the resume of De La Hoya, and definitely one. If you weren't around at the time and you probably didn't know, you probably wouldn't go to it. So yeah, if you didn't know, go and have a look, please. It's a great fight. And so 3 months later, Oscar stopped a guy called Obakar, 48-2-1 in the 11th round, injuring his left hand in the process. But the stage was now set for the two best pound-for-pound fighters in the world, in Oscar De La Hoya and an undefeated IBF welterweight champion, Felix Trinidad, 35-0, to finally collide. Now, one obstacle that cast doubt over this match being made was Arum was promoted, obviously, by Oscar De La Hoya, and Don King he promoted Trinidad. But thankfully, they put their differences aside and agreed on the unification bout to take place at the Mandalay Bay Hotel in Las Vegas on September 18, 1999. Now, it was billed as the fight of the millennium. Oscar was guaranteed $21 million and Trinidad $8.5 million, with their fight generating 1.4 million pay-per-view buys and 71.4 million in pay-per-view revenue. I mean, it set the stage for it was an absolute massive fight.
Well, it was one that was done on HBO's version of the Legendary Night series that they did for TV, for Trinidad versus De La Hoya. When you watch the documentary version of it, you get to see the scale of how big of a fight this really was. We might not be really doing it that much justice. I think we are, because we know how big of a fight this was. But massive. This is a massive, huge fight. Modern day version of this would have been Mayweather-Pacquiao. That's exactly what a modern day version of Trinidad De La Hoya would have been. So for people that may not have been around or followed boxing so vehemently back then, you think of Mayweather-Pacquiao and the hype that brought. This is that, probably times 10. Now in the fight itself, Oscar boxed superbly well for 9.5 rounds until he stupidly decided to run for the rest of the fight, believing he had the fight won, and he gave away 3 rounds. It was probably one of the most catastrophic gambles of his career that backfired. One judge scored the fight a draw, and the other 2 actually favoured Felix Trinidad by a slight margin, and Oscar had lost his unbeaten record. And after the fight, Oscar said, "I thought I had it in the bag. I swear I did. The 11th and 12th rounds, I was protecting the rounds I had in the bag. I was doing what I was trained to do, box. I landed 100 more punches than he did."
Oscar, you seem to be taking this setback extremely well.
Yeah.
Are you really hurting inside?
I know I won. He's a great fighter. I thought I put a boxing lesson of my life. I mean, people were expecting me to duke it out. He's a very strong fighter, but I was making them miss and making them pay, and I'm hurt.
You're hurting.
I'm hurt inside, emotionally.
Because your plan didn't work?
My plan did work. I thought it did work, but hey, I mean, he's a good fighter. He's a great champion. I praise him a lot, and hopefully we can do it again.
You made your reputation as a smart warrior. Tonight, the feeling some people will have going away from here is that instead of closing the show the way we've seen you before in big fights, that you were protecting a lead and threw a fight that you were winning away.
Oh my gosh, I thought I had the fight won easy. I mean, by outboxing them, by outclassing them. And that's what people didn't see all along in Oscar De La Hoya. Throughout my last few fights, people know I'm a warrior. I can stay in there with anybody. But I wanted to demonstrate a boxing show, and I guess it didn't work.
The people in your corner obviously were telling you that what you were doing was working, and you believed them, right?
Of course it was working. I felt it in my heart that it was working. But primeramente un saludo a todos mis mexicanos amigos. Ganamos, pero de vuelta la vamos a hacer de vuelta y ni modo, pero voy a trabajar más duro para el siguiente a ganar.
Translation.
I just told them that I worked hard. I'm very sorry, all my Mexican fans. I love you guys. I'll be back.
Now, not long after the fight, De La Hoya made another change in his training staff due to the defeat, firing Clancy and blaming him for the failed strategy against Trinidad. Now, following several attempts to get the rematch signed, it failed several times due to financial disputes. Oscar stopped chasing, telling Schuler they made a wrong move by thinking they had all the power because they won the title. They think I need Trinidad. I don't need Trinidad. Once it was made public that the rematch would not happen, many critics blamed Oscar, but he did not help himself when he attempted to make a move into music and got involved with several endorsement deals. The boxing loyalists feared that he'd become distracted by outside projects, which threatened to derail his boxing career.
I mean, we'll go into a bit more detail with the music situation, but a great fight the Trinidad won. I honestly, where we just spoke about Whittaker, these names, the names just get bigger and bigger. This guy has fought all of them, and I felt Whittaker won that fight. The Trinidad fight, I still believe Oscar wins the fight. Even though he does surrender those last 3 rounds, I still think he does enough in those first sort of 9 rounds. There's like the first round, you could go either way, maybe even the second. But Oscar more or less dominates. He really does. He's the boxer puncher, but in this one, he's an absolute boxer. And Trinidad, he struggled. He struggled at times. And for me, I think he got robbed. Moving on, and at the turn of the new millennium, Oscar picked up yet another knockout victory over Darrell Coley. He was 34-1-2 in February, winning the vacant but less regarded IBA welterweight title to improve his career record to 32-1 with 26 knockouts. Now, negotiations for that Trinidad fight hit a roadblock when Oscar refused to move up in weight to fight him, but the WBC welterweight title did become vacant when Trinidad moved up to the 154-pound division. That title was put on the line with the IBA that he had successfully taken from Cowie for a unification fight of sorts against the undefeated Sugar Shane Mosley, 34-0 with 32 knockouts at the Staples Center in Los Angeles on June 17, 2000. I believe Mosley had only fought twice before this at this weight. Now, both fighters had sparred a few times in 1992, but before met once officially in the ring 16 years earlier when Mosley was 12 and Oscar was 11. Mosley won the fight that night, but the money involved in their professional career would be significantly improved. And Mosley was guaranteed no less than $4.5 million, the highest purse in his career at the time, while Oscar De La Hoya was taking home $15 million. Now, it was a closely contested fight in front of more than 20,000 spectators, and Mosley earned a narrow split decision victory. 2 judges scored the fight for Mosley, who scores 116-112 and 115-113, while the third had De La Hoya winning with a score of 115-113. Now, HBO's unofficial scorer, who was Harold Lederman, also ruled in favour of Mosley at 116-112. And it was a fight of 2 halves, basically. Oscar winning the first half and Mosley winning the second. But they did battle hard in close quarters on those last 12, that 12th fantastic round. But do you know what? Again, for me, Oscar, I think the one pattern I was getting when you watch Oscar and you go through his career again, and one thing I recall as watching him, all them years ago, he had such energy from the first half of fights. The second half, he would waver. And I think that's what happened in this one.
I believe that's what happened in this one, and I believe that's why Mosley deserved to get the victory. When you watch the fight back, and if you've not watched the fight back, if you're listening, please go and do it. Again, great fight. Another great fight to watch. Another great battle of skill between these 2 fighters. These 2 guys in their absolute primes at this moment. Now, Oscar De La Hoya talked about a rematch, but also toyed with the possibility of retirement. Now, he and Bob Arum were not pleased with that scoring, but it wasn't as controversial as the loss of Trinidad. De La Hoya told the Las Vegas Journal-Review, "I have to rethink my whole game plan in life. This is a business, and of course people want the rematch to make more money. I don't see it that way. I'm thinking of my health and my career." Mosley actually spoke highly of Oscar after the fight, also to the Las Vegas Journal-Review, and he said, "In the 12th round, we went soul-searching to see who the real champion was. De La Hoya showed he is a great champion. He stood there and fought with me for the whole 12th round. I whacked him a couple of times and he wobbled, but he stayed up and he still kept fighting. He's a true champion." Now, a few years later in an interview with Fox Sports, Bob Arum actually blamed Oscar for the defeat, citing the recording of an album in the months leading up to the fight. And this is what Bob Arum had to say. It was a stupid thing for him to do. Boxing is a full occupation and requires tremendous focus. Oscar got diverted in his focus doing the album. I thought it was dumb. De La Hoya defended this decision, of course, by saying, I had the opportunity to record an album or to train. I picked the music because it was kind of like the easy way out. I didn't quit on boxing. I just kind of picked the one that was going to make me happy at the time. So it's quite obvious that for once in his career, Bob Arum is actually saying something that is not a load of bullshit. He's actually writing what he's saying, because Oscar De La Hoya making that decision to go and record a music album, taking time out of his training schedule, preparing for another big fight against Mosley, was a bad decision, because he lost that fight. And he could have won that fight, and he probably why he switched off in the second half of that fight, because his mind was never fully focused on this particular fight, clearly.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think for me as well, with some of the stuff I didn't necessarily know going into the investigation and trying to get all this information together to sources, is that if his father didn't press him as hard as he did when he was a kid, maybe those outside influence wouldn't have been so much of a pull for him. I think that, if his father had laid off him a little bit as a kid, you're naturally fit. You don't need to be having your kid out running every single day at certain times. That's just, it's good to have the discipline, but for him to not go to his prom and things like that, he would have still been a great fighter. I don't think pushing him as hard as he did as a kid, I think that actually didn't help him, because as he's got older now, he's making those silly decisions. And you mentioned the music and the outside distractions. Well, the music wasn't the only thing that made Oscar happy. It was a beautiful singer from Puerto Rico who also made several albums of her own, called Millie Correcha. Now, she actually featured in this music video, and she will be a part of the story later on. And the EMI International actually released Oscar De La Hoya. It was a self-titled CD with it was a Latin pop album with 13 tracks, both in English and Spanish, written by Diane Warren and the Bee Gees. And he was actually nominated for a Grammy. So it wasn't a complete waste of time. And then in September 2000, his relationship with Mukla abruptly ended when she watched on television De La Hoya escorting another woman who was Ariel Ramirez, another beautiful blonde woman, and at the Latin Grammy Awards, obviously, where he went to collect his, or he was there because he was nominated. And in December 2000, Mukla actually filed for $62.5 million lawsuit against Oscar, claiming he was an alcoholic, abusive to her and their daughter, and that he used them as props to promote his public image. And the case was actually settled at a court in 2001 for an undisclosed fee. So, those outside distractions were making a difference now when he's going in the ring.
So that's 2 out-of-court settlements in 2001. First of all, for the potential rape charge against him. And then secondly, because he was basically, yet again, couldn't keep his penis in his pants and was escorting all sorts of lovely ladies. And the worst part about it is that he did it in front of the whole world. That's the worst part about it.
Well, while his missus was watching on the telly at home as well, it's even worse.
That is just a shit for that, an absolute shit for doing things like that. Now, after a 9-month absence from the ring, in which time Alcazar was replaced with Floyd Mayweather Sr., of all people, who told Ed Schuler, I am teaching him what boxing is all about. If he did that good on his own, now that he's got a good trainer, you're going to see a new and improved Oscar De La Hoya. I am teaching him defence and offence all together. Next up was Arturo Gatti, 33-4, on March 24th, 2001 at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. It was a one-sided beating before Gatti's corner threw in the towel. 3 months on, and Oscar dominated the WBC Super Welterweight champion Javier Castelo, who was 51-4 over 12 rounds, winning a world title in his 5th different weight. He added extra pressure on himself by saying, a loss would mean that's it, it's over. I would have no reason to be inside the ring anymore. And what a way to put that sort of pressure on yourself than to be able to go in there and win a world title in a 5th weight. And to end 2001, he actually ends up getting married to Millie Courtier.
The girl from the music video. Oh, dear. There's no doubt. I mean, you look at, I'm not that way inclined in terms of I like fellas, but he was an handsome man, wasn't he, Oscar? I mean, there's no doubt about it. You can see why the ladies liked him. So Oscar moved on, but following a 15-month hiatus due to failed negotiations and an injury to his left hand, he eventually returned to the ring on September 14, 2002 against Fernando Vargas, who was 22-1. And their hatred was real. I mean, you can, again, there's some videos on here of these two, brilliant. And their rivalry actually went back to 1993 when Vargas was actually angered by De La Hoya laughing at him when he fell down a snowbank, and Oscar was laughing rather than helping Vargas up. Apparently, he's fell over and he's tried to say to help me up, Oscar, and Oscar's just belly laughing, and he's taken it personally. Needs to lighten up a bit, I think. But Oscar did tell Tim Graham for ESPN.com, Vargas is always talking about me. I think he's in love with me. I actually hate the guy. I have never used the word hate when talking about other opponents, but I hate him. Vargas, who began the war of words by saying he was more of a Mexican than De La Hoya, actually replied to that statement by Oscar, saying, I would rather die in the ring than lose to him. It's not about giving it a good try. For me, it's win or die trying. I am going to do everything I can to make this the last fight of his career.
May 4th, we're going to get down. And, I hope I'm not chasing and chasing and chasing and chasing and chasing. Because you know what? Mexicans, you know what I'm saying? We want to see a fight, right? Raza wants to see a fight, right? We don't want to see, I'll run, I'm going to run. This is the way I fight. Is that all you have? Is that all you have? Oh. Is that all you have? Hey, he couldn't even wrinkle my tie. He couldn't even wrinkle my tie. Come on. Is that all he has? I know he has that glass jaw, so I know where to hit him. Okay? I know where to hit him, believe me. Why is he crying? I'm not gonna attack. Why are you crying for? Why are you crying? Why are your eyes watering? Why are you crying for? Bad. Why are you crying for? I got something in my eye. Why are you crying? Damn, look, he's crying. When Mayweather said he didn't know the difference between one Mexican and the other one, let me just tell you like this, how you can tell the difference. This one has fucking balls.
Not quite sure if he's saying he's going to retire or he was going to kill him. Either way, it was heated. I mean, it's crazy. This guy just really needs to loosen up a little bit. Now, the fight was rightfully billed as Bad Blood and took place in the Mandalay Bay Arena in Las Vegas. It was a closely fought first 6 rounds. De La Hoya took over the fight from that point, from the 7th, and knocked Vargas down with a left hook in the 11th round before it was eventually stopped moments later. The win is widely considered to be one of the biggest of De La Hoya's career, another big win, especially after Vargas actually tested positive for steroids after the fight. Then on December 12, 2002, the Consulate General of Mexico in Los Angeles granted De La Hoya Mexican citizenship, and Oscar was delighted and quoted as saying, I've always felt that my blood is Mexican.
To be fair, he is of Mexican heritage. That's what I don't understand why people sort of said he's not a Mexican. His family, we've told the story, his family were Mexican. You know,
Vicente.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Vicente was Mexican. He emigrated. Yeah, okay. He had his children in California, but that doesn't not make them Mexican. Do you know what I mean? That's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous that he got treated that way. I think he wasn't your average Mexican. He just wasn't the same. Again, Canelo. Look at Canelo Alvarez in today's era of boxing. He doesn't look like your typical Mexican. Not to stereotype people, but when you think of Mexicans, you don't think of Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez, nope. Fair skin, ginger hair. He looks like he's from Scotland. He doesn't look like he's from Mexico. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So for De La Hoya to finally get that confirmation by the Consulate General of Mexico saying, here you go, here's Mexican citizenship, must have been a great moment for him in his career. And they would move on now and go into one of the next biggest fights of his career. In April 2003, De La Hoya signed to fight Shane Mosley once more 5 months later at the MGM Grand, but first he had to win a tune-up, and he did that by knocking out Yuri Boy Campos, who had a record of 18-5 in the 7th round of their fight in May of 2003. The fight was aired on HBO pay-per-view for the unified WBA, WBC and the Ring Super Welterweight titles. De La Hoya was going to make 12 million, while Mosley was set to make 4.25. However, the bout was briefly cancelled when Mosley asked for his 4.25 million purse to be increased by another 1.25 million for a total of 5.5 million. Bob Arum refused and declared that the rematch was over, done, finished. Negotiations resumed, and the two sides once again reached an agreement in March, and Mosley's purse was increased to 4.5 million, with an additional 500,000 to come from De La Hoya's purse should he win. The fight itself was another closely fought contest, with Oscar again edging the early exchanges like the first fight, and Mosley finishing the stronger and hurting De La Hoya in the later rounds. Mosley was actually awarded a controversial, unanimous decision, with most of the fans actually thinking De La Hoya had won this, but all three judges scored the fight 115 to 113 in favour of Sugar Shane Mosley. Again, Harold Lederman, HBO's unofficial ringside judge, scored the fight 115-113 in favour of De La Hoya, and according to a top-ranked poll of ringside reporters, 16 scored the fight for Mosley, 8 for De La Hoya, and 4 had it a draw.
Another one. I think this second one, again, it's tight. You could quite easily go Oscar in this one. I think probably Mosley won. For me, I think Mosley wins the first one, and this is probably more like a draw. It's difficult. Again, I don't know. I haven't watched this second one again. I'd have to watch it back. But the decision of the fight obviously angered De La Hoya, who stated, obviously, I thought I won the fight. I didn't think it was close. Bob Arum was in solidarity with Oscar, saying, I've never seen anything like this in my life. It wasn't even close. George Foreman, who was also ringside and a part of the commentary team, he said, this is terrible. This is not what you want boxing to be. Impossible. Something is going on here. Now, Mosley disagreed with the controversy and the request for an investigation into the decision. And he said, I really don't know what to think about the investigation. All I know is that I won the fight. I'm the legitimate champion of the world. Now, this is where it takes a bit of a turn. And as part of the investigations by the Bay Arena Laboratory Cooperative, aka Belco scandal, a scandal involving the use of banned performance-enhancing substances, as in PEDs, by professional athletes, Mosley later testified in front of a grand jury that he had taken the doping agent EPO prior to this fight.
Wow. That's a bit of history that if you didn't already know about, now you know. Shane Mosley, a doper. And it was proven he was a doper before this fight as well. And that then casts more judgment upon how you see this fight. I think I agree with what you said earlier that, I think it was potentially a slight win for Oscar or even a draw on the cards. Again, it's one of them fights, it's so subjective to watch and score. Even now, so many years after the fact, you could sit there and watch it and think, nah, maybe Oscar did win that or maybe Shane did win that. But now you know the facts of Shane Mosley being on steroids. Now you know. Now that'll probably cloud your judgment just as much, just to go back and watch it and say, actually, yeah, you know what, De La Hoya won this fight and Moses should have been banned and all the rest of it. And yeah, it's just the ugly side of boxing rears its head in this particular incident. Now we're going to move on to talk about another huge moment and fight in De La Hoya's career. So De La Hoya signed a lucrative contract to fight the undisputed middleweight champion Bernard Hopkins, who was 44-2 and won on September the 18th, 2004. Now, both fighters had tune-ups on the same card in June at the MGM Grand. Hopkins won his fight easily over Robert Allen, and De La Hoya barely survived against Felix Sturm. He was 20-0, which earned him a unanimous decision to win his first middleweight title and capture the WBO title in the process, making him a 6-weight world champion. Oscar told John Gregg of BoxingTimes.com, everything went wrong tonight. Everything went out. What can I say? I trained as hard as I can, and we did everything perfect, sparring with the big guys, but I stepped in the ring and boom. Oscar, of course, still had his critics, so he gained so much respect for taking on the 39-year-old Hopkins, who was considered by many to be the pound-for-pound number one in the world. Oscar was under no illusions about the task at hand, saying, this is the fight where I just suck it up and let everything loose. This is for all the marbles. This is the fight that will define my career. It's an incredible 12-year boxing career journey starting at 130 pounds, and he's now fighting for the undisputed middleweight championship at a catch weight of 157 pounds. Hopkins was undefeated in 11 years, and he was the 2-1 favourite. He made 10 million on this fight, while De La Hoya made 30 million, with the fight generating 1 million pay-per-view buys. Now, Oscar surprised the boxing analysts by standing toe-to-toe in the middle of the ring and trading punches with Hopkins instead of hitting and moving out of danger against his bigger opponent. That being said, much of the first 8 rounds were fought tentatively by both fighters, who were very tactical and defensive-minded. By the 9th round, De La Hoya had swelling and bruising around both of his eyes. Then his dream suddenly collapsed. A perfectly placed left hook to the liver sent De La Hoya down to the canvas, squirming in pain and pounding the mat in frustration. Hopkins became the first man to knock Oscar De La Hoya out, who admitted to John Gregg, "He got me right on the button. Believe me, I tried getting up, but I couldn't. I have what it takes, but he hit me right on the button." After daring to be even greater, he said, "I feel proud, but obviously very disappointed, but I don't regret it all." De La Hoya didn't retire after the loss to Hopkins, but he did take 20 months out, and he created the famous Golden Boy Promotions before returning to the ring at the age of 33 against Ricardo Mayorga. And he did dominate Mayorga on May the 6th, 2006, stopping the Nicaraguan in the 6th round to claim the WBC Super Welterweight title. So that fight with Hopkins is another good fight to look at throughout his career. It's a great evidence of these two guys, you know, at different points where you kind of think Hopkins he's just this undisputed middleweight champion. No one's touched him in 11 years. How was De La Hoya going to deal with that? Well, for 8 rounds, he dealt with it pretty well until he got caught in the 9th.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone, I mean, you read all of it beforehand. I've memories of it, and it was like, how on earth was he going to have a chance against Bernard Hopkins? You know, it wasn't a dramatic attempt from weight because he had fought at light middle for a while, but you know, it was still a big step up against a big middleweight, and many obviously clearly felt that Hopkins was going to win the fight. And at 39 years old, he was the pound-for-pound number 1. I mean, that's incredible. He's got to be one of the oldest pound-for-pound fighters around, surely. I've never known of a 39-year-old to be bossing it at that age, at that ripe age. So credit to him, and credit to Oscar De La Hoya for trying and daring to do that to the next thing and be it was already a 6-weight world champion, but you know, to have beat Hopkins at a legitimate middleweight would have been an impressive notch on his record. Unfortunately, weren't to be, but the next guy was Mr. Mayweather Jr. And we're going to go into the build up a little bit here. I don't want to go, we don't absolutely ruin it because obviously we don't want to, this could come up eventually for one of our legendary nights, but it did take 6 months for the two sides to reach an agreement for the fight between De La Hoya and who was now the current pound for pound champion or number 1, who was Floyd Mayweather, who's 37-0. And it was finally confirmed for Cinco de Mayo, again, May 5th, 2007, with Oscar being quoted as saying, "It's about legacy. This is the fight of my life." Once again, Oscar changed trainers, but this time it was for good reason. And he actually switched to Freddie Roach, paying him a flat fee of $1.3 million. Now, the Mayweathers were not seeing eye to eye at the time, as I'm sure we'll all recall for those that were around at this time. And Oscar was basically not comfortable with the situation. And he said, "I really didn't feel he, as in Mayweather Sr., was going to be able to be as passionate as I'm going to be. How is he going to feel when we're in the middle of a training camp and some of the family members call him and say, 'Don't do it. I don't want any distractions.'" So, understandable. Now, I do believe, looking into this, the real reason, however, probably came down to the colour of Oscar's money, with Mayweather Sr. demanding $2 million to be his coach. I mean, he was already his coach since, 2000? It's crazy. Now he's asking for $2 million to fight his son. And this is Mayweather himself, Mayweather Sr., said in Las Vegas Journal, "If they want me to work against my son, then they're going to have to pay me. My son and I, no matter what's gone on between us, he's still my blood. Hey, I'd work for Oscar if the deal is right, because that's my job and boxing is just a sport." Mayweather Sr. said that he was actually offered $500,000 as a guarantee, with the promise of another $500,000 if De La Hoya won, which he actually called insulting.
"3,000 miles apart, two men find themselves in the same place. In San Juan, Puerto Rico, the most celebrated fighter of his generation readies himself for what would be the greatest victory of a brilliant career. For Oscar De La Hoya, the routine is familiar. But this time, something's different. The odds are against him. Unusual territory for a boxing legend.
Look at De La Hoya! He wants to fight! The Golden Boy is golden once again.
Meanwhile, just beyond the globe, the Las Vegas Strip, lurks an undefeated world champion, universally regarded as boxing's best.
Look me in the eye right now, Oscar. Look me in my eye. I'm gonna beat you.
Now, as boxing's most anticipated matchup in years approaches, two men seek their greatest victory. Only one will find it.
This is what I know. This is what I do. You don't want to make me your enemy.
Well, I'm the top drawer. You remember that.
You can't be two good guys. I chose to be the bad guy.
I'm gonna beat you till you respect me. I'm gonna beat you, I'm gonna make you call me pretty. I'm gonna beat you, like that.
Now, HBO ran the first ever showing of the reality show titled 24/7. Absolutely brilliant show, yeah, absolutely excellent. It set the precedent of what boxing build-ups were going to be all about. De La Hoya and Mayweather also went on an 11-city tour to promote the event. The gross gate was then a record $18,419,200. It broke the previous record of $16,860,300 set by Lennox Lewis versus Evander Holyfield, the rematch in '99. Now, the fight guaranteed a record 2.45 million pay-per-view buys and a then record of 136,853,700 in domestic revenue. De La Hoya became the all-time leader in pay-per-view sales with 12.8 million buys. After the pay-per-view percentages were included, De La Hoya made 52 million on this fight and Mayweather made 25 million, making it the biggest payday in boxing history for two fighters in one fight. The fight itself went on to make, in total, 165 million, making it the richest fight ever in boxing at this moment in time.
It's unreal. I mean, them figures are just insane, aren't they? I mean, oh, goodness me. And it is quite nice to see someone getting a bit more money than Mayweather. 52 million for De La Hoya and 25 for Mayweather. Brilliant. Now, I'm sure that I think this is probably the last time Mayweather ever was the B-side, if you like, as they started to throw at this time. And so the fight itself, Oscar was the aggressor throughout the whole fight, with Mayweather fighting in the first half sort of on the counter. And in the second half, Mayweather began to stand his ground, and he actually landed some hard combinations to the head. And I must say, you know, for all the negativity that I sort of throw Mayweather Jr.'s way, this was the Mayweather Jr. that I enjoyed to watch. He was on the counter in that first half. The second half, he did stand his ground, and he does. This is, if you're going to watch Mayweather Jr., I think the second half, I mean, I know we're talking about Oscar here, but he was brilliant for me in that second half of the fight. And the fight ended with both boxers violently exchanging. You would never see Mayweather Jr. do that sort of the last 10 years until the final bell rang. The two judges gave Mayweather 4 of the last 5 rounds, making the difference in what turned out to be a closely scored fight. So 2 had it 115, 113, one for De La Hoya and one for Mayweather, and the other 116, 112 to Mayweather. Now, a split decision went in his favour. But interestingly, the judge, Jerry Roth, actually scored the last round for Mayweather, which I believe De La Hoya won the last round. Now, the only judge to do so. Now, I'm sure many people, you watch that last round, I think De La Hoya wins that. Now, had he scored that 12th round to De La Hoya, the fight would have been a draw. Wow. That is just an interesting statistic that we've pulled out there. You know, it's a great fight. Another fight, if anyone's listening, go and watch this fight. But the last round in particular, and tell me whether you think that round is so important, and would you give that to De La Hoya? Because that would have been a draw on Mayweather's record.
Now, the pro-De La Hoya crowd booed the decision, and ironically, Mayweather Sr., who sat ringside, said, "I thought Oscar won the fight on points. He threw more punches and was more aggressive. My son had good defence and caught a lot of punches, but Oscar pressed enough to win the fight." Mayweather Jr., of course, felt differently, and he said, "It was a masterpiece of boxing. I showed you why I'm the best fighter of this era." De La Hoya was at first graceful in defeat, telling reporters, "You just have to respect the judges at this point. I don't feel like a loser because I came to do what I had to do. Now, as a champion, he has a big responsibility to work harder and maintain that title." And he was then quoted as saying, "I felt I won the fight. I landed the harder, crisper punches. I felt when I landed my punches, I could see I was hurting him. I was pressing the fight, and if I hadn't pressed the fight, there would be no fight. I'm a champion, and you have to do more than that to beat a champion." Oscar, again, put a little bit of blame on his trainer. "Freddie Roach didn't train me properly. I went into the Mayweather fight as a one-dimensional fighter." It just seems to be a pattern and a trend throughout his career that he, as good of a fighter as he was, and some of the great fights he's been involved in, he always looked for a little bit of an excuse, and he always seemed to look to the people who were training him, the people that he'd spent so many weeks in camp with, preparing for these big fights of his career. Because he took a loss, he blamed the trainer. Now, I don't think that fight was, I do think that fight was controversial, because I do think that when you watch that fight back, it was definitely a draw. I honestly think that fight was a draw. That this is, again, it's controversial. People will say, "Oh, well, Mayweather won it in the second half. It was all De La Hoya's in the first." Everybody's split and divided in opinion on it. But when I've watched that fight back about 3 times since it happened, and I honestly believe that it was a draw. I think it was a very, very close fight, and I think it should have warranted a rematch. A rematch should have happened, because it would have made even shit ton of more money for these two guys. Of course, that wasn't to be, and we know what would happen next. But the fact that, you know, this never came about, a rematch never happened, it was just really, really sad that we never got to see that. But I would probably say the Mayweather fight was the last great display of Oscar De La Hoya's career.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'm with you. I remember watching the fight, staying up to the early hours of the morning, and I had a game the next day, and I remember, like, I was just literally, I remember going home after that game and just keeping for the whole day. But I stayed up to watch it, and I felt at the time, I thought Mayweather won it. I did, early hours in the morning, you sort of drifted in and out, not quite there, we're not quite with it. When I actually sat down and watched it, I've watched it a couple of times after throughout the years, and I'm with you. I think that last round was a pivotal moment, and the fact that one judge did decide to give the 12th to Mayweather, I think it span it away. I think a draw would have been a fair reflection of the fight. And then the rematch never happened, because Mayweather was not going to earn as much money. Mayweather now wanted the most amount of money. De La Hoya wasn't interested in that, because he was the money man. You can see the difference in how much they earned on a night. And I think that was probably the real reason. And Mayweather doesn't have rematches with guys that give him trouble. He just doesn't. It was never in his nature, and that's why, we'll talk about it at the end. But that's why I think Oscar is always going to be considered to be a better fighter, more worthwhile watching, because De La Hoya is going to push himself. But anyway, outside the ring, an hour after the Mayweather fight, Oscar's wife Millie actually gave birth to Oscar Gabriel De La Hoya. Then in 2006, Oscar co-authored a children's book entitled Super Oscar, based on his own childhood memories. The book was actually released in bilingual edition in Spanish and English, and it appeared to appeal to the wider market. And there was no doubt his inspiration by the news that Millie and Oscar were actually expecting their second child, and their first daughter was Nina Lauren Ninante De La Hoya, who was actually born December 29, 2002. And then 2 months earlier, Sports and Entertainment Publications LLC, an affiliate of the Golden Boy Enterprises, actually acquired, this is another famous time, is The Ring, the KO magazine, and the World Boxing magazine from Kappa Publishing Group. And they own the rights, and many people still believe that is the reason why, The Ring, it's not quite as what it used to be. So, yeah, that was the stuff on the outside of the ring.
So he would return back to the ring after the loss to Mayweather, and it would be against Steve Forbes, who was 33-5, on May the 3rd, 2008, in a tune-up fight in preparation for the Mayweather rematch that he was looking for. Following Mayweather's unexpected retirement, Ricky Hatton became the frontrunner for a fight on September the 20th, but he rejected the offer because he felt the scheduled date was too close to his last bout. De La Hoya then decided to pass on a fight in September and stage his last showdown against either Manny Pacquiao or Miguel Cotto. After Cotto was defeated by Margarito, it was announced that De La Hoya and pound-for-pound superstar Manny Pacquiao had agreed to fight on December 6, 2008 at the MGM Grand Las Vegas at the welterweight limit of 147 pounds. Before the fight, a 7-foot bronze statue of Oscar De La Hoya was unveiled on December 2nd, 2008 in downtown Los Angeles at the Staples Center. Considering the Los Angeles natives hated him, he ended up getting a statue outside the Los Angeles Staples Center. Pacquiao went into the fight recognised as the leading pound-for-pound boxer in the world, and Oscar then hires trainers the legendary Angelo Dundee, Ignacio Nacho Bernstein, and the young boxing talent at the time, Edwin Valero. Tickets reportedly sold out just hours after they went on sale. The total gate revenues were said to be nearly 70 million. Apparently the second largest gate revenue in boxing history after De La Hoya's Mayweather fight. HBO announced that the fight generated 1.25 million pay-per-view buys, totaling more than 70 million in pay-per-view revenue. Of course, the fight goes down in history as Pacquiao soundly defeated Oscar De La Hoya, surprising many pre-fight analysts who'd predicted a victory by De La Hoya due to being such the bigger man. The fight was actually stopped before the start of the ninth after Oscar in his corner threw in the towel. Pacquiao was ahead on all three judges' scorecards before the stoppage, with two judges scoring at 80-71 and one scoring at 79-72. After the fight, Freddie Roach stated, "We knew we had him after the first round. He had no legs, he was hesitant, and he was shot." Confirming Roach's pre-fight predictions that he'd grown too old, De La Hoya crossed the ring to Pacquiao's corner and told Roach, "You're right, Freddie, I don't have it anymore." When asked by reporters whether he would continue fighting, De La Hoya responded, "My heart still wants to fight, that's for sure, but when your physical don't respond, what can you do? I have to be smart and make sure I think about my future plans."
Yeah, it was Pacquiao demonstrating how great he was at the time, and he was devastating. And the size just didn't matter with guys like Manny Pacquiao. He was just ferocious, and he was just a great win for him. And clearly, Oscar was not the same fighter. But only 2 years, no less than 2 years before that, he's going at it with Mayweather. So. That's another reason. There's another reason when you look at it why that Pacquiao Mayweather fight didn't happen then, because Pacquiao was a different animal. De La Hoya eventually, after this fight, he announced his retirement on April 14, 2009, ending any speculation about a potential fight with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. That was what they were touting, but it didn't happen. And De La Hoya finished his professional career with a record of 39 wins, 30 by way of knockout, and only 6 losses. And a couple of those, you could probably say he didn't deserve to lose, albeit there's a couple of wins and they probably didn't deserve to get. So, it's a very, in terms of who he fought, though, some magnificent fighters, you can't deny it. But when he got to the top echelon of the world, I still believe he just wasn't good enough. De La Hoya had publicly acknowledged that he had a substance misuse problem. This was following his retirement. And he said, "After doing an honest evaluation of myself, I recognize that there are certain issues that I need to work on. Like everyone, I have my flaws. And I do not want to be one of those people that is afraid to admit and address those flaws." Now, he actually underwent treatment at the Betty Ford Center in Rancho Mirage in California for alcoholism. He would return in September 2003. I believe it was just before the Canelo Mayweather fight. And then during an interview with the Univision, this is the famous moment, in August 2011, he confirmed that it was indeed him in the leaked 2007 photos of him cross-dressing, and putting it down to poor judgment due to the first use of cocaine.
Oh God! Photos. Oh, I've just got the mental image in my mind of De La Hoya in his boxing gloves, in the fishnets and the stilettos, and it's just an image that will be probably etched in my mind for all eternity. It's God. What the hell was going on at that time in his life for him to don the fishnets and the stilettos and think it was okay to have pictures taken? Surely he must have known like these type of photos were going to be coming around and coming out. I mean, this is 2007. 2007 was around about the time social media really took off. I think Facebook really started to take off around 2007. So surely he mustn't have anticipated how viral these things were going to go, and such a lasting legacy that it has, because people that are non-boxing fans, when you mention Oscar De La Hoya, they either think of him as, oh, the golden boy. Oh yeah, no. That's the guy who wore them stockings, weren't it? and to be known by that from non-boxing fans just goes to show you how much of an impact them pictures had. Oh my word, I can't believe, like, you know, we've covered an absolutely outstanding career. Let's be honest, but we had to mention this. It had to come into the episode, because it's just a moment in time that I don't think he'll ever live that down. He'll never ever live that particular moment down.
My life was a big mess. Rock bottom was recently, within a couple of years, just thinking, you know, is my life even worth it? I don't have the strength, I don't have the courage to take my own life, but I was thinking about it. It got to that point. There were drugs. My drug of choice was cocaine and alcohol. Cocaine was recent, in the last 2 years, last 2.5 years. And I depended more on the alcohol than the cocaine. It took me to a place where I felt safe. It took me to a place where I felt like if nobody can say anything to me, it took me up to a place where I can reach out and just grab my mom. I was dependent on those drugs, those alcohols. I've been unfaithful to my wife. I was unfaithful.
More than once?
Yes. We're obviously not talking a Tiger Woods here, but I was unfaithful. It was filling the void of maybe not feeling loved to a certain point. It was filling the void of maybe not having, not feeling safe. When you're in the state of that high of drinking and doing drugs, and emotions run through your head like there's no tomorrow. I can't even recall what runs through my head because I'm sober now. All these emotions just run through your head, and you do stupid, crazy things. But there's something behind it. There's something behind every action. We haven't had the best relationship in these last few years, my wife and I. And so the substance abuse, the drinking, the partying, coming home late, not caring, we're taking it one day at a time. We were separated for a while. All I can do is just get myself better.
Now, moving forward, and on January the 14th, 2014, Oscar and Millie had their second daughter, Victoria Lauren Rose De La Hoya. Oscar was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame that same year. Now, in 2017, in January, De La Hoya was actually arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol in California, to which he pled not guilty, and the charges were dismissed in 2018. The following year, during an investigation of an attempted extortion, he admitted to having used cocaine in early of 2018. In September of 2018, De La Hoya was reported to be seriously considered running for President of the United States, and in an interview he informed 30 Mile Zone, or known as TMZ, that he was assembling an exploratory team to assess the viability of a candidacy, stating that if the numbers look right, I'm going to go for it.
Oh my God.
The cross-dressing president.
Yeah. Could you imagine? Oh, dearie me. I mean, you had, was it Kanye West? Kanye West versus Oscar De La Hoya for the presidency of America. I mean, you know what? I wouldn't put anything past the country sometimes. Crazy. Just got to finish this off properly. I mean, there is also another story that's actually surfaced in October 2019, and I think it wouldn't be right if I didn't mention it. There is loads of information out there, but I don't want to really go too far into it. I think it's still an open case, and we don't really know too much more because of what's happened with the coronavirus. But apparently, Oscar De La Hoya was accused of sexual assault by an unidentified woman. I believe she was a nurse. They're calling her Jane Doe in October of 2019. I've not heard anything more since, but there is another sexual abuse claim out there. Just to throw that out there, because you will find it out there. Is if you went in search for what happened in '95, you come up with this one as well. So again, reported across. I believe it's Sports Illustrated that actually wrote is a long piece on it, so you can look at it. But we don't want to end it on a complete sour note. Oscar De La Hoya was a fantastic fighter. He generated approximately $700 million in pay-per-view income, making him the top pay-per-view earner before being surpassed by a certain Floyd Mayweather Jr. and, of course, Manny Pacquiao. On top of that, it was a great fight, Oscar. I just think he lost his way. I think if he weren't pressurised so early by his father, I think, and he allowed him just a little bit of time with his mates when he was a young teenager. When, you need to go out with your friends. You've got to make your mistakes there and then you probably wouldn't be making the same mistakes you would as an adult. And I think that may have been the problem with Oscar. When he got all that money and he was able to do things, he had those breaks, and he began to blame other people. I think if his dad, although he was an influence in making him a great fighter, I still think he could have just taken a step back and allowed him to just be a teenager. And I think maybe he just wouldn't have made those mistakes. That's just my honest opinion.
It's quite possible. You're quite right in what you're saying. It might have not changed a single thing. We're never going to know that. But I do agree with what you're saying in terms of giving him that little bit of freedom, allowing him to grow up a little bit at some point. Because if he would have done, we might have seen some of these issues that he had, the alcohol abuse, the cross-dressing situation. That might have never happened because he might have done it as a kid and got it out of the way. Being at university and things like that, you just never know. You honestly just never know. I think the way to look at things, really, for me, is, you got to look at the fact that he won 11 world titles in 6 different weight classes, including the lineal championship in 3 separate weight classes. He's actually ranked the 13th best boxer of all time, pound for pound, by BoxRec. So if that doesn't tell you what you need to know about Oscar De La Hoya's career, I don't know what will. We've really enjoyed sitting down to discuss his career and go through some of the fights, his upbringing, the Olympics, the death of his mother and trying to overcome that, and of course the nasty side of life which got to him later on down the line, the fact that he tried to make a comeback. And I think the most notable bit of news, really, most recently, is that he's rumoured to be coming back. A lot of fighters are coming back recently. We've got Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr., a fight that was supposed to happen years ago is now happening. There's talk of Oscar De La Hoya coming back to fight a returning Marcos Maidana.
Wow. Interesting. Maidana's going to make a return. He ballooned up to God knows how. He was massive, wasn't he? Last time I see him, he was huge. I didn't think he would ever be able to get himself back down to weight, but it'd be interesting to see what weight that'd be. I'm guessing it'd probably be something like light heavyweight. They've gone up a little bit, or maybe super middle or something. I don't know how that would work, but I don't. Again, I mean, these fighters coming out. I mean, is the Tyson Jones Jr. That's happening, isn't it? Still, I mean, that's another one that's coming out. I don't know. I'm sort of against it. I think if you're going to do this, I think they should just be like a veterans boxing elite thing, where you can have Tyson, Jones Jr., De La Hoya, Bruno, whoever wants to come out of retirement. They fight each other in a little veteran thing, like they do in the tennis and things like that. And if people want to watch it, then great. We're getting YouTube guys that are fighting in the ring. I would much rather see some old veterans have a fight over 6 rounds or something. That's more interesting. So I think he should just put it to bed. You've had your chance, really. You're gonna fight Maidana, and then what? Are you actually gonna believe you can go on? We see it with Ricky Hatton. He had a few years out of the ring, came back, and he got done against Senchenko, and he would never have lost to him, if he didn't leave the ring. So, I mean, other than the fact that Oscar De La Hoya was a fantastic fighter, he was great to watch, and when he was aggressive, he was outstanding. Even as a boxer, when he was on the outside, he was great as well. I just preferred him going forward and being more aggressive. When he did that, I think he used to get his more success than most, and that left hook was devastating, and definitely one of the best Mexican-American fighters in the history of boxing.
Absolutely, and ironically, the person that surpassed him in terms of that many weight classes and winning world titles is Manny Pacquiao, the person that he faced in his last professional fight of his career. Yeah. Manny Pacquiao's won eight titles he's won world titles in 8 different weights. So that just goes to show you that both of these guys going in the ring at that one time was a case of a passing of the guard, as they say, a changing of the torch, whatever analogy you want to use for it. That particular fight was that, and Manny Pacquiao is obviously still boxing at the moment, as we know, and you just never know what boxing may bring to you. Like we've talked about Tyson and Jones and De La Hoya potentially fighting Maidana. I've really personally enjoyed going through his career, going into the depths of what made him the fighter he was, how he got to that position, how he was able to overcome adversity and become an absolute megastar. Yes, he was a shit in parts of his life. He dipped his whip more times than a prostitute. But, you know, this guy was an absolute boxing hero, a legend of the sport, which is why he's inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable episode to sit down and cover the career of the Golden Boy. And of course, if you've been enjoying listening to this episode, please let us know on social media at career_profiles on Twitter, and the Facebook page is the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. If you've not already subscribed to us, you can check us out on any available podcasting app out there. Now, if you've not checked out the Patreon page as well, please go and do it. Provide some support. Get early access to episodes. Get yourself a shout out on social media or on the podcast. Go and check out the Patreon page. Patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast Network. Whatever support you can provide genuinely will help us achieve that goal of getting to the upper echelons of the podcast world. We absolutely love what we're doing. We're in the top charts of every single one that we've got out at the moment, and we really enjoy the fact that we are independent and that you guys are supporting an independent podcast. So if you've got a spare dollar or a spare pound or a spare couple of quid a month, go and become a patron. Go and help us out. Help us get to that promised land that we want to be. The full-time podcasters. We'd love it. We'd absolutely
brilliant.
love it.
Oh, yeah. I just want to just jump in there and just say, yes, like for people that are listening, thank you so much. You know, we do put a lot of effort into this, getting sourcing all this information and then putting it together and putting it out and try and make it as good and clean and telling a nice story as we possibly can. So, they're not all nice, but the best ones are probably the worst. But just thank you. Please keep doing what you're doing. I just want to repeat that, Sean. It really does mean a lot to us.
Thank you, fight fans, for listening to this career profile, the career of the Golden Boy, Oscar De La Hoya.